There we go. I had some glitches today with my YouTube studio here, so hopefully this is all coming out correctly now. And if there was a momentary failed run just a moment ago, my apologies. Things went kind of askew, and I had to restart my browser. Anyways, I think I'm here now, and I think I'm live. So welcome to my devotional for today. Today we're in Proverbs chapter 7, verse 7, and welcome. Just going to look at this verse, but I want to just remind anybody who's following along with this. This is part of a little story. In Proverbs chapter 7, we're being once again taught the importance of learning God's wisdom and the teachings he gives us. And there's a little story told in the middle of this chapter that the summary of the story is this. He says, I looked out through my window, through the lattice, or we might say the curtains in our day, but looked out through the window, and he saw this young man. And this young man goes to find the prostitute, and he goes and spends the night with her, or the adulterous woman at least, and goes and finds her and spends the night with her, but he's killed or possibly loses his life because the husband or something. So this is this little story about the threat and how he ends up at the bad end because he does this wrong thing. So that's the story that this is in. Verse 7 is just part of that. So I want to focus, of course, we're doing one verse at a time. So we look at verse 7. Verse 7 says, and I saw, so he's looking out through his window. He says, and I saw among the naive and discerned among the youths a young man lacking sense. And so then it goes on with the story. But I want to focus on that today. And just this idea of the contrast of this person he sees and the person who's receiving the teaching. So the teaching is being given to a young man, right? So he's saying, like, listen to your father's teaching. Like, I'm teaching you this. It's important. Learn it. Hold to it. Cling to it. Build your life around this teaching. And by contrast, I looked out through my window and I saw among the young men, the naive. It's not an insult. It's just, those that are too young to know better yet. And discerned among the youths, right? So a young man like yourself. But this person lacked sense. And so then the story goes on of what he does. And so it's almost like the story is saying, I see a possible you, right? Like, you're young, you're naive, but I see a possible you. And this is a story of what could happen to you if you're among the young, but you lack sense and you go down this road. And so, of course, the intention is the opposite, is that you'll learn from this teaching and not be like this young man. The condemnation is not on the youngness, and it's not on the naiveness of the person. It's on the lacking of sense. That's the problem. All of us have the excuse of ignorance at some point in our life. We all can say, I didn't know, right? To many things. As we grow up, we're going to be learning things. But before we learn those things, we're in a state of not knowing. And no one can really be blamed for that. You can't be blamed that you didn't know that this would happen or that would happen. And, and just the simple things of life, even like, I didn't know that if I didn't put the milk back in the fridge, it would start to sour, now I know, you learn that when you're a child or whatever it is, you learn these things. And so we all have the excuse that we're young or we're naive as we're aging. We're naive about everything until we learn it. And so, okay, that's fine. You can hardly be blamed. But we don't have the excuse of, I lacked sense. And what does that mean? Well, it's the idea that a person who just doesn't learn. The person who lacks sense is this idea of the person who's like, yes, you're young, yes, you're naive, but there's a teacher in your life. So presumably you also have a father or an uncle or a mother or somebody, or even if it's just God, just teaching you as you age and as you gain experience, then the person with sense learns, and they grow, they become less naive. And so that's once again meant to be all of our stories. All of us should be deciding to go in the direction of sense and learning, as opposed to the person who lacks sense and just follows after his appetites and his desires. And so that's kind of the story. And so this is meant to be a cautionary story of which will you be? Will you be the naive young one? Notice this, he's saying, I saw among the naive, I discerned among the youths, a young man who lacks sense. It's like, there's all these youths, but they don't all lack sense. They're learning, they're growing. but there was one there who didn't. And I guess it's kind of like saying, are you going to be that one? Are you going to be the one that doesn't learn and instead just pursues your instincts? And that's going to be a problem. So if you're a young person today, every now and again I get to speak to crowds of young people, which is it's a nice privilege, to be able to do that. Um, and there's so many things that we'd like to say, and one of them would be this: like, if you're a young person, never be embarrassed. You never need to be embarrassed. I know you can be, but you never need to be embarrassed about not knowing something. Like I said, every one of us start not knowing anything, and you slowly are acquiring knowledge. So you don't have to be embarrassed about not knowing something. But what you should be embarrassed about is if you just refuse to learn the thing. And that's where we should be a little embarrassed if we decide, I don't need to know that. I don't care about knowing. And you decide that you're not going to learn. Now, there's some things in life, like no one needs to know how to fly an airplane. Some people prefer that. They like that. They go and do it. That's great. So I'm not talking about that. But what I am talking about is the sensible things of life that we all don't know, and you don't need to be embarrassed about that. But you shouldn't let yourself just live in that lack of knowledge. You should learn as you go. We all should be on a lifelong pursuit of growing in sense, growing in knowledge, or growing in wisdom. Growing up is not optional. Everyone has to do it. And the question is whether you'll embrace the process or resist the process. So growing up or becoming not a youth, not a naive young person anymore, but becoming an adult means learning. It means increasing in competence and wisdom, right? So that's what learning is, and that's what the gaining of sense is. It's not just gaining the ability to do a thing, but the wisdom to know how to do it well, to when to do it, when not to do it, where to be, where not to be, who to be with, who not to be with. All of that learning and that wisdom, the gaining of sense, is the process of growing up, of becoming mature. Some people take their entire lifetime to learn that. But as long as you're still learning it, that's the important thing. It's also, though, the whole idea of maturing and growing up past that naive youthful thing is learning how to take responsibility for what we do. And so that's part of the being a person of sense, is that you realize, hey, I'm accountable for my actions. I'm accountable for my choices. I'm accountable for the things I have ignorance in. If I choose to live in ignorance and in honesty, I'm actually going to be held accountable by nature for the things I don't know. So I need to grow in learning, right? So, and I need to take responsibility and realize, man, if I don't, have food, well, that's somewhat on me. I got to figure out how to get food. If I don't have, a place to live, well, that's kind of on me. I shouldn't just be blaming everyone else. I need to go, well, what can I do to conquer this issue? And you move forward and you grow, right? Growing and becoming and leaving naivete behind includes controlling yourself, learning how to control yourself, to deny yourself so that you can bring about a better outcome, rather than just following instinct and just giving in to all your appetites. You say, no, if I control myself, I can actually have a better outcome in the future. And that's all part of leaving naivete behind and gaining sense, right? Or else, and then the last thing I'll say today is just the idea of finding your place in a group. Part of leaving youthful naivete behind is the gaining sense of knowing what's my part in society. A child's part in society is merely to receive from society, receive from their parents, receive from their teachers, receive. So what they're doing is basically just receiving so that they're growing, and they'll grow in sense. But as we become adults, we need to be able to make the shift and go, now I have a place in the group that's not merely receiving. I have to shift to how am I contributing to the group as well. The young man in this little story, he's just about receiving. He's going to find this woman and satisfy his desires, and that's it. Whereas the wise young man would go, no, you're the wife of another member of society. That you're his wife. I can't have you. And so you find your place in the group. And that's what it is to grow away from youthful naivete into a place of having sense, having wisdom. And so I would say that's part of what verse 7 is pointing us towards, is that we all start out as naive youths, but if we have sense, we learn and we grow and we become mature in these ways. Anyways, God bless you in your pursuit of this. And I know I pointed that a lot at young people because the verse says it, but it applies even to us as adults. We all need to remember that we're on a lifelong journey of improving and increasing in these things. So all of us need to remember this. Anyway, God bless you. Have a great day. And the Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow for verse 8. We'll see you then.